The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. He spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and smeared the clay on his eyes, and said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he went and washed, and came back able to see. His neighbors and those who had seen him earlier as a beggar said, "Isn't this the one who used to sit and beg?" Some said, "It is." But others said, "No, he just looks like him." He said, "I am." They brought the one who was once blind to the Pharisees. Now Jesus had made clay and opened his eyes on the Sabbath. So then the Pharisees also asked him how he was able to see. He said to them, "He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and now I can see." So some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a sinful man do such signs?" And there was a division among them. So they said to the blind man again, "What do you have to say about him, since he opened your eyes?" He said, "He is a prophet." They answered and said to him, "You were born totally in sin, and are you trying to teach us?" Then they threw him out. When Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, he found him and said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered and said, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "I do believe, Lord." And he worshipped him. The Gospel of the Lord. Sometimes I attend Mass, and it's wonderful. Sometimes I attend Mass, and it's not wonderful. A few times it's been bad. The worst Mass ever for me happened when I was dating Cynthia. I wasn't Catholic at the time. In fact, I barely believed that God existed at all. And I certainly didn't believe that Jesus was God or anything like that. But Cynthia was Catholic and liked going to Mass. I was interested in Cynthia, so I was interested in going to Mass with her. The two of us went to Cynthia's grandmother's house for Easter that one weekend. This was early in our dating relationship, and some of her family had gathered there for Easter, the Easter weekend. Cynthia said that she wanted to go to Mass either Saturday night or Sunday morning. And this confused me. We were on a trip, it was away from home, and why would we go to church on vacation? So that made no sense to me, so I was already in a bad mood about the whole idea of going to Mass. And so I thought the best thing to do was just kind of get it over with. So I opted for Saturday night instead of Sunday morning. You guys are quick. I wasn't that quick, okay? Cynthia said she loved the Easter Vigil service, especially at her grandmother's house and at the grandmother's church. As we headed off, I noticed that all of her family was happy to see us off, and they all chuckled, as you guys are, as we headed off to the Easter Vigil. Now, I didn't understand why people would be chuckling, but they did, and probably should have asked some questions. So we get to the church, and at the beginning of Mass, I noticed that this Mass isn't like the other Masses. At the start of Mass, they invite us to go outside because they're going to start a fire and do some blessings and stuff. And I didn't bother going outside. I figured, we'd be right back in because I didn't see how they could fit much extra stuff into a 1-hour Mass. So about 10 minutes later, we've been sitting in the dark, and people come back inside. And so there's this long, drawn-out procession of this candle coming down the center aisle, and everyone is holding their candle in the darkness. Then the readings start, lots of readings, right? Lots and lots of readings. There's standing, there's kneeling, there's sitting, and the readings kind of went on forever. People get baptized, they get confirmed. Eventually, the Eucharistic liturgy starts, and people receive their first communion. So the Mass ended at 11:30 p.m. That was a 3-hour Mass, right? It starts after sunset. And so that pretty much was a seemingly endless trial of misery for me. And so I was so mad. I was so mad when I was leaving the church. But, I was trying to hold it in, dating Cynthia. And I tried to keep it down. But, man, a 3-hour Mass, that was nuts. So since, I was disconnected. I was disconnected from God. And I didn't see the point of any of it. And for me, it was more than just a waste of time. It was a waste of time, and it was uncomfortable. So about 20 years after that, I started to recognize that God does exist. Jesus is God. I began to see that God wants to be in our lives, to have a close relationship with us. I converted to Christianity and joined the Catholic Church. So when people join the church, they spend the better part of a year. They're in prayer, reflection, and study. And at the end of that year, people join the church by receiving the sacraments at a certain Mass each year. And you see where this is going? We're right back at the Easter Vigil, which I swore I'd never do again. Now, the Easter Vigil where I came into the church, that was a completely different one than the one that was there 2 decades earlier. Well, it did start with the fire outside, and it had the slow procession of the candle, and there were all those readings, and all the standing and sitting and kneeling. People were baptized. I received confirmation there along with my colleagues. And it was also over at 11:30 p.m. But there was a major difference, and it wasn't the liturgy, it was me. This time I loved every moment of that Easter Vigil because I was connected to God, and I understood the spiritual significance of each of the aspects of that Mass. And so for the first time that night, I received the Eucharist with my wife standing beside me, and that spiritual chasm that had been there between the two of us reduced significantly. So I'll bring up this difference between these two, the same liturgy, but it's different for me, these two different experiences that I have to explain something that's going on in today's gospel reading. Jesus, in the plain sight of others watching, heals the blind man. Now, the blind man was known by the people in the area to be blind. Now, the man that was born blind can see. So this is John's Gospel. John makes use of this metaphor between being physically able to see and being spiritually able to see. And that's why John points out that the blind man, he gains his physical sight, but then also gains his spiritual sight in that, Jesus is just not a regular person. It is the born man, it is the man born blind, is the man born blind that gives witness to Jesus. The blind man says, Jesus is a prophet. Now the Pharisees, they have their physical sight, and they directly see that this well-known blind man now has his sight, but they remain spiritually blind. And John's kind of being a little bit clever here, because he's saying that even though you might have your physical sight, you may still be spiritually blind. Now, during that first Easter Vigil that I talked about, I was about as spiritually blind as a person could get. Today, the Easter Vigil is one of my absolute favorite Masses to attend. So just like physical sight, it's not a matter of being like completely blind or completely able to see. It's much more interesting than that, because our goal as Christians is to continually increase our ability to see spiritually. For instance, the blind man didn't fully get Jesus when he was calling him a prophet. Jesus, yes, he is a prophet, but he's much more than that. And as time wore on there, the blind man was able to see Jesus differently and worship him. Now, there's one more aspect to all of this that I want to tie into this homily. Jesus, spit and has this clay, and he puts that in the man's eyes to help him gain his sight. Spit and clay. Now, many people kind of get this emotional reaction going on when they think of possibly being the person of having that done to them. Spit and clay, they do not heal people from blindness. So, when we imagine this scene, It connects us to this miracle. It's in a powerful way. And Jesus could have healed the man in a different way. Jesus didn't even need to touch the man to be healed. He could have performed the miracle from another town if he wanted to. But the spit and the clay, that connects us pretty intimately with this miracle, and it connects us with this reality that Jesus is God. Lent has this effect as well. When we fast, we pray, we give alms, we're connecting to God in a special way. And all these things in some way have a physical component to them. That physical aspect plays a vital role in our Lenten observations. It brings focus to our spiritual practices throughout the day and the week. And the goal is to be more connected to God. God created the physical universe, so it should not be surprising that the physical aspects around us can be used to improve our relationship with God. And you've probably noticed that every Mass has some of the same physical things that I mentioned about the Easter Vigil Mass. We got the standing and kneeling and sitting and the readings. And at this point in my life, I really appreciate that fire that starts outside at the beginning of each Easter Vigil Mass. So that fire that comes into the church. So it's after the sun is set and all the lights are off in the church, and we have this fire coming in the form of a burning candle, and it's dark. And then, but as the candle's coming in, this light is shared from person to person, and this dark church begins to glow brighter and brighter. It's a physical representation of what happens when that light of Christ is in us. It's able to shine out into the darkness. So the light that is within each of us has this ability through God's grace. We can affect each other. And ideally and ultimately, we heal one another of our spiritual blindness.